Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have an amazing experience I want to share with you. It's something I had been wanting for 8 years and finally got, and super excited about it. I also have 2 works in progress that are new since the last time I talked to you, and I will share those with you. So let's get started. I do have a couple of tidbits that I want to share with you. One is from Froggy on Ravelry, who sent me a link to a new book that is available. It's called Wonder of Wool, and it's about British sheep breeds. So it's written by a woman who spent a long time as a designer in the clothing industry. And then she decided to kind of shift her way of thinking and wanted to learn more about like why aren't we using British wools in our clothing? And so she highlights, I think there's about 30 or so breeds that she's highlighting of British wool breeds in the book. It's a different type of book than the Fleece and Fiber source book that Deb Robeson and Carol Acarius wrote, that's available, which covers breeds from all over the place. This one is specific to British breeds. So if that is something of interest to you, I wanted to let you know about it. And I will leave a link down below in case you are wanting to learn more about that book. This next tidbit came from Dorothy. She sent me an email with a link to a YouTube video, which is actually a news clip from a local station, and it's from the Pacific Northwest. It is about the Cowichan sweaters by the Coast Salish tribe and the importance of this particular garment to the culture. So I will leave a link to that down below that you can watch if you are interested. Back in 2018, which was the first year of Casual Friday, I had a goal, a personal goal, of seeking out yarns from other wool breeds to knit with. I felt like in my knitting, because I focused so much on construction and stitch pattern and things like that, that I always tended to go to really basic yarns, and that I needed to spread my horizons. And when I started looking in the yarn shops, I realized there really wasn't much for me to spread my horizons into. I was knitting with mostly Peruvian Highland wool because that was what was being sold. Now merino is certainly in the stores and it's become huge, and merino's fine. I don't love it. I prefer a wool that's a little sturdier and isn't going to pill as much and whatever. Those were the yarns that I could get. A little bit of mohair here, maybe some Shetland there, but that was it. And so that was my goal. I realized it was really difficult. It was going to be difficult for me because the yarn shops weren't selling that, and I was trying to look online. And eventually I went to our local Shepherd's Harvest Wool Festival, thinking that maybe some of the shepherds would have had their fleeces turned into yarn and then I could buy from them, and that ended up not being the case. But what I did discover was by walking into a booth where she was selling washed long locks from different long wool breeds that could be spun into your hand spinning or added to your weaving. So she's selling these little 1 ounce washed bundles, and it had the crimp pattern was completely apparent. Like you could see the length of the fleece for each breed. You could see that some of them were almost straight, just a little wave. Some had like an S curve, some had a spiral, some had really tight crimp. And that was when I realized I need to start from the wool. I need to start from the wool off the back of the sheep and then work my way up into spinning the yarn, and then I'll understand more about the qualities of different breeds. And so that's what brought me into spinning. after, a while, I didn't become obsessed with it like I kind of assumed I would. I was interested in it. I learned a lot about how yarn is constructed, the different ways to process the wool to get, woolen spun versus worsted spun, and the different ways you could actually spin, and how you could create different effects and the direction of the twist and all that. So I learned a lot about yarn construction, and which I could then relate to commercially spun yarns. And that was interesting. But what I found was that I didn't know what I was spinning toward, like what kind of projects would I be spinning for, because I mostly knit sweaters and socks. And that seemed overwhelming to me to do a spin for a sweater. Like that's a lot of yarn to spin. And then likewise with socks, it's a lot of yards of very fine singles that you then ply together. And I just thought, oh my God, I can't imagine spinning for either one of these. So what am I spinning toward? And I did end up buying off of Etsy this like kit. It was like 30 wool breeds, 1 ounce of each, and it was combed top. So it had been washed, it had been prepared. In many ways, they all looked the same because they were all combed top, but I could feel the difference, and I could do one after the other and kind of have some understanding of what breeds I liked to spin versus what ones I didn't. So that was interesting. But again, what am I spinning toward? And so it's been 5 years of being a spinner, but not really. When my friend Elizabeth talked me into doing Tour de Fleece, which is, it occurs every summer during Tour de France, the bicycle race. It's about 3 weeks long, usually in July. Sometimes it starts at the end of June. And you just pick your own goal for like spinning through your stash or scouring your raw fleeces or doing whatever. And I ended up in that first year just getting back into spinning. And I had some fiber I'd bought from a local farmer that turned into yarn that I loved. It was exactly what I wanted in a yarn, but it was the first time I got what I wanted. And so I bought more fiber from her, and I kept spinning because it was also fun. I had finally I'd gotten good enough at long draw to be able to do it quicker for me. And so it made it more fun. And I spun a sweater's quantity. Last summer, I did the same thing. I spun a sweater quantity. A viewer, Amber, had sent me some roving that a friend of hers had milled and dyed. And I turned that into a sweater quantity and knit that into a sweater. And I've also gone through the process of spinning yarn and making socks out of them. So I know now that I can spin toward a project that I will actually want to knit. So that makes me want to spin more. I'm still not obsessed with it. But one of the things that I've been wanting for the past few years, I've been looking for more advanced spinning classes and finding it hard to find something that was what I wanted. There's a lot of beginner spinner classes, and then there's classes for spinning with color and managing color to get different effects. And those aren't the kind of yarns that I typically want to knit with that have multicolors in them, kind of barber poled or gradients or really variegated. That's just not the kind of yarn I typically want to knit with because I'm usually knitting with texture, and then that's just going to obscure both the pattern and the yarn. And that's not usually what I'm looking for. So I started looking at other folk schools. I looked at the John C. Campbell Folk School, and I saw that Deborah Robeson teaches there, and she had the class she was teaching was full months ahead of time. And so Deb Robeson is one of the co-authors of this book that spinners are going to be familiar with, the Fleece and Fiber Source Book. So much information on each type of breed and, the average length of the staple and how coarse versus how fine it is, pictures of what it looks like unwashed, washed, spun in different ways. And so much information in there. And I thought, oh, that would be great to take a class from her. I wonder where else she teaches. And so I found her website and I saw that she teaches these 2 retreats, one in March, one in November every year. So this was June last year. There was a wait list for November already, but she said, people don't have to pay until 6 weeks beforehand, so that they sign up early and then people realize they can't do it and then people can come off the wait list. There were still spots in March, so I just went ahead and signed up for March and told my friend Shelly about it. She's the one who got me volunteering at the Gale Woods farm as farm assistant. And she was like, oh my gosh, it's exactly the kind of thing that I would want to do as well. The retreat is called Explore 4. And so each day we are working with a different wool breed. And she has sourced multiple examples, so multiple fleeces, in some cases comb to top or roving as one of the examples. She has at least 3 examples of each breed. In our case, I think there were 7 for one of them, so that we can compare the same breed that was grown in different places and that was commercially processed versus what you can do if you process it yourself, like combing or carding and then choosing how you're going to spin it. So that was fantastic. And so she starts you out in the first day with an easy one. We did Perindale. And there's all kinds of tools. Some people drive there because they live, not that far from the Washington area, or they live in Washington. In one case, somebody lives on San Juan Island where the retreat was. Another person lived just, the ferry right across from it. But some people, came from the East Coast or the Midwest, like I did. But the people who drove, some of them brought drum carders. A lot of people, I brought my own hand cards and combs, but there were other combs there that I tried, and I realized, oh, I do like combing. I just don't like the way I have to comb with my setup, and I'm going to have to figure out how I can change my setup so that I will enjoy combing more. So we did Perindale the first day. The second day we did Teeswater, which is a long wool and like 8 inches long. And then we did Valley Black Nose the third day. And that was sort of, she puts the harder ones in the middle. And it really didn't like the Valley Black Nose. And then the last day was Clint Forest. And I loved that one. We had our experience with Deb teaching, and she would present the breed to us, and she had handouts. She called them handouts. Now, if you are the former editor of Spin-Off magazine and you've written the Fleece and Fiber source book, this is what you can see as a handout. This is on Teeswater, a little bit map about that. Another handout was this entire booklet on Valley Black Nose. She prepares these for the retreat. So she's presenting this, she's telling you the history of the breed, like how it was first, like if they know who first developed it and where it was developed, and then if it came to the US, how it came to the US, how it's being raised now, how it might be different from like the version we have here in the US might be different from the version in the UK, for example, all that kind of stuff. And then we can spend some time all morning long doing whatever we want with this fiber. So we have our first sample on our chair when we get there in the morning, and then she just keeps bringing around another baggie with another sample, every so often, until we have just this pile of samples of fleece in baggies, and we can process them however we want. We can skip some of them if we don't like them. We can do whatever we want, and that's the morning. And then there were 3 days where somebody set up like a little market in the lobby of the lodge where we were all set up for our spinning. And they were local people. A couple of women from Lopez Island, which is right next to San Juan Island, they set up and they had fleeces. Now, I checked a bag that had a little bit of room in it, and then I brought my knitting bag, my personal item. I did not bring a regular carry-on. I thought about maybe bringing one, but I didn't want to just bring a really huge carry-on that was empty, and I was like, didn't really want to buy anything I figured I'd probably buy a little something, but I didn't have a spare bag. And I wasn't going to buy a fleece. I have plenty of fleeces here. And so these women from Lopez Island went over and looked at what they had. What happens to me is I get magnetically drawn to a fleece. This is how I end up buying fleeces. I don't necessarily know anything about how to check if it's a good one. I don't know anything about anything. I just magnetically pulled to a fleece. So there was this huge bag of a fleece. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, look at the crimp on this. I'm like, wow, good thing I don't have a checked bag because I can't buy a fleece. And the woman says, oh, you can buy as little or as much as you want. You could just buy an ounce if you want, or 2 ounces, 4 ounces, whatever. And I was like, oh my God. And so I was asking, and this is Romney, and she says, we've been raising our flock for 35 years specifically to grow wool for hand spinners. I'm like, oh my God. So I bought 8 ounces. And let me show you, Deb Robeson describes this as French fry crimp, and it looks like crinkle cut French fries. It's just amazing. And I love a gray fleece. So I bought 8 ounces because I thought, well, that'll be enough because I'll scour it and lose some of it processing, and then I can, you know, make a hat or two, a couple of hats or something. That's fine. I can do that. And then that afternoon we went to visit a school teacher who has a small flock of sheep. And he was telling us about like what his goals are with his sheep. He's got like a couple dozen sheep. And it's lambing season, so there were a couple of lambs that were less than a week old, you know, bopping around. And it was just so interesting to hear, you know, what his goals as a farmer is, because he's a teacher and is often not there. These have to be sheep that can lamb on their own without needing much help ever. And also the ones he keeps are going to be ones that do well on his pasture. If they're not doing well in his pasture, if they need some other kind of diet, he's got to get rid of them. He'll sell them to somebody else. So that was really interesting to hear, you know, like that's what his goals are. And he has a farm store because they grow vegetables and stuff in the summer. And he normally sells his wool to a local mill and gets it turned into yarn, and then he'll sell the yarn in his yarn store. But it was shearing season too, so he had some bags of fleece there. And one of the women, she's a young woman, was in the retreat, had bought her first fleece from him, and it was the first time he had ever sold a fleece to a hand spinner. So it was like a big thrill for both of them. So that was really fun. Then one of the women in the retreat lives on San Juan Island, used to have a yarn shop there, also an indie dyer, closed the yarn shop, she's still dyeing. And she set up some stuff one day, like some dyed roving and yarn. And it was local yarn. It was like Suffolk wool grown on the island, and then it was milled at Skagit Wool Mill, which is across the ferry. And then she dyed it there on the island. And the thing about Suffolk, there's like a handful of breeds, the down breeds, that are naturally machine washable and dryable. And one of the things Deb was telling us was that you gotta do a swatch and wash and dry it, because if you don't know where the Suffolk came from, like if it's really Suffolk, or if you don't know really where it came from, you need to try that out. So this came from a local farm that we visited the next day. And I just like going to see farms. So I went along, and again, not going to buy a fleece because I don't have room in my suitcase. So we get there, and it's a big barn, and there's just bags of fleece. Put it on the screen so you can see. So they had all of this Shetland in, different bags. And I saw one, again, gray. There's something about gray fleeces. Beautiful. And it had a little label on it, and it said what the sheep's name was and who its mother and father were, Luna and Hubert. I just kept standing next to the bag because I didn't want anybody else to buy it, even though I wasn't going to buy it. I tried to see if I could buy just a few ounces of it. And they're like, nope, you have to buy the whole fleece. And I was like, I asked my friend Shelly, you want to split it with me? She's like, no, I'm looking at something else. And I'm like, oh, I just don't have room in my suitcase. I didn't bring a checked bag, but I don't have a bag. This woman says to me, oh, I always go to Target every year and buy pillowcases on clearance. I'm like, okay. She's like, so I can give you one and you can put the fleece in there, take on the plane with you. So I bought the fleece. I could see like they said we could take it out and throw it on the skirting table if we really wanted to see it. And I was like, no, I don't need to do that. Just keep it in the bag. But I was also told when I get back to the cabin, put some towels on my bed and then lay the fleece out and let it dry out, because the Pacific North, it was really rainy there. And so just in case it was damp and it accumulated moisture, let it dry out. And so I put it out on my bed and I was like, oh my God, this is even more amazing than I realized. So I've just torn off a little bit of it. So you can see there's like this gray and black, but it's like, it's black near the skin and then it gets gray outward. And so when I looked at the label again that explained, about this fleece, it has breed/color and it said Shetland/Shayla. And I just didn't know what Shayla meant. I just wasn't reading it that carefully. I just was looking at the fleece and I wanted the fleece. And so I started looking it up, and so there's a billion colors of Shetland fleece. Not really. There's 13 or 16 colors of Shetland fleece. And there's one that's called Shayla, but there's actually Shayla and Shayla 2, because different parts of Shetland refer to it in different ways. And regular Shayla is just, it's all the same charcoal gray. And then the Shayla 2 is, I think, what I have, which is where the fiber shifts color in the same, like, it's dark at one end and then it gets lighter at the other end. So I think that's what it is. And I was trying to read up on the color genetics. It is so complicated with Shetland. It's not that easy. They have, so I have this fleece that I bought. And I also bought some of the yarn that Kathy had dyed from the Suffolk. So the woman, Angie, who grows the Shetland fleece, she likes the Shetlands. They have no problem with the weather in the Pacific Northwest because Shetland Islands weather is pretty crappy. They do really well. She's never had to help a single ewe lamb ever. And so that's kind of one of the goals that she has, is that these be kind of self-sufficient. Well, her son, Levi, is the one who has the Suffolk sheep. And what Deb was telling us is that because Suffolk sheep have black faces and black legs, the bodies are white. They're born, the babies are black when they're born, and then it grows into the white fleece except for their faces and their legs. It's amazing. That when you shear them, some of that black can get into the white. So when you try to sell it to the wool pool, it's contaminated if there's any black fibers, because they want completely white in order to make it so it can be dyed any color. So what many Suffolk farmers have done is breed for shorter and shorter fleeces. And I'm assuming that's so they wouldn't have to shear as often. Not clear. But Levi's Suffolk, which he grows for meat, they have this beautiful long fleece because he sourced some of his sheep from a local farm that's been there for 100 years, and the flock has been on this marshy land, which is very wet, like the Pacific Northwest, so that they're ideally suited for the weather. And they haven't bred, because it's all been the same flock for 100 years, same family. They haven't bred them for shorter fleeces. And so Deb told him a couple of years ago when they visited the farm, do you realize what you have? This is, hand spinners would love this, because it's a longer staple and it's naturally superwash. Like, you can send it through the washer and dryer. And so that's when he started clipping it, and then Kathy was taking it to the mill Or maybe they're taking it to the mill and then she's just dyeing it. I'm not sure. It's amazing. So I'm excited to turn this into a pair of socks. And then I think next year, because I did sign up already for next year, I'll probably get a Suffolk fleece and bring it home. They're huge. And that's the thing that was like stopping me. It was like, oh, these things are so big. What am I going to do with all this? And then I thought, oh, I belong to a spinning group. I bet you there's other spinners who would love to have an amount of Suffolk to spin with that was a nice staple length and would be machine washable. So I'm not worried about that now. I had so much fun. It rained all the time. It rained from evening all the way to like lunchtime. And then it would break in the afternoon. I could go for a walk, a very soggy walk through the campground and see what it's like in season. They have yurts. I was in a cabin, but they have yurts and they have canvas cabins, they have campsites, they have RV sites. So it's really, it was just a wonderful experience. The scariest part of all of this, and it wasn't scary, I was worried. I was supposed to fly out on the Sunday, which is the day before the retreat starts. And we were getting a storm coming in. They were predicting 16 to 24 inches of snow between Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. And so I was like, oh my God, that flight's never going to leave. I mean, it's Minneapolis, they can do anything. But even if they left, I wouldn't be able to get dug out of my house and to the airport. So I switched my flight to Saturday and missed the storm, thank goodness. And by the time I got back, the weather, it had warmed up so much. It was like 70 degrees the next week. From one Saturday, 16 inches of snow. The next Saturday, 70 degrees, and it was all melted when I got home. I never would have known it had snowed. The trickiest part of that retreat is the transportation and getting to the retreat. But other than that, it was amazing. The people there were great. There was one farm visit I didn't go to. I was just like, I need to sit in my room and stare at the walls for a while. There's just so much. But maybe next year I'll go. And then there was also the opportunity to go to the mill that made this, spun this yarn. But it wasn't going to work with me trying to get back to the airport. But next year I'm going to pad some time on either end of the trip so that I can make sure that I'm calm getting there and that I have things extra that I might want to do afterwards. So it was fantastic. It was like going to spinning camp because I was in the woods and I was spinning and I just had the most fun. Got to see baby lambs, got to buy some fleeces. Really, really excited. So I think my Tour de Fleece spin this summer is going to be this Shetland fleece. I'm going to turn that into yarn that I will then knit into a sweater. I've got two projects going on right now. One of them I always started usually a sock in the airport when I'm going on a trip, but this time I started a glove. This is the last project for my college friends. I started last fall. I've been knitting socks. I think 5 of my friends wanted socks and my friend Scott wanted gloves. So I've got the first glove finished, and I will go to the overhead in a minute and kind of show you different details. So I started this at the airport, got all the way through to the gusset, and it was time to separate for the thumb, and I just kept second guessing. I'm like, I think the circumference of the thumb that I wrote down has to be wrong. I texted my friend and I said, can you confirm this? Because I'm thinking this can't be right. And it wasn't right. I thought his thumb was 3 3/4 of an inch around. It was 3 3/8. And that makes a lot more sense when you compare that to his other finger circumferences. So I'm glad I texted him, but I didn't have any time to knit. Well, I had time, but I didn't knit when I was at the retreat. I knit traveling to the retreat and traveling home from the retreat. And then I've been finishing these up. There's something about gloves. They're actually a fairly quick project. They're probably half the stitches that you'd have in a pair of socks, but there's a lot more fiddliness to it. And I think the small circumference of the fingers, I always kind of stop halfway through because it just, tiny little circumferences. I use magic loop, which means when you're knitting a little tiny circumference, you're pulling the cable out a lot. It wouldn't work for something like a 9-inch circular to do a 3-inch finger, at least not for me, because I hate 9-inch circulars because the tips are so short. If I were to use double pointed needles, I would need 8-inch needles because the way I knit, I just need a longer needle that needs to anchor against the edge of my hand. 5-inch DPNs, just not long enough for me. I'm not comfortable with them. And never mind the ones that are called glove needles that are 4 inches long that are made for tiny fingers, because it would be quicker if you can knit that way. And it's the same problem I have knitting with a 9-inch circular that's just not long enough for me. So I use magic loop. It works. I just kind of get like, oh, not another finger. But let's go to the overhead and I can kind of show you the comparison between my friend's outline and the glove that I made for him. So this is the right hand glove for my friend. So what I do when I trace somebody's hand for gloves is, have them put their hand out, I go all the way around, and then I measure circumferences. So I measure the circumference of their wrist, I measure the circumference of their hand, right above their thumb, and then I measure the circumference of each of the fingers. Now I wrote 2 3/4 down here because I had measured around the base, but I see he's got these kind of crooked fingers, and I can see that his finger gets bigger up here. And just doing the math and everything to divide out stitches and how many stitches to cast on or pick up in between each, I thought, oh, this is going to be easier on me, and it might fit him better if I make all 3 of these 3 inches. So I did that. Now, one thing that I wrote, how? Now, normally when I would cast on for a glove or a mitten, I would take the measurement around the hand and then multiply by my gauge. So he has a 9-inch hand, and I would cast on, and I was doing 8 stitches per inch, so that would be 72 stitches. And I would cast that on for the wrist, knowing that the wrist is smaller, but the ribbing is going to pull in. He had a pretty significant difference between his wrist and his hand, and so I cast on 8 inches worth of stitches. And then when it was time to transition to the hand, I increased evenly around in the first round of stockinette so that I did an additional 8 stitches so that I was up to 72. Now, I checked with him. Usually thumb is bigger than the other fingers, but it's not usually that much bigger. That's why I texted him and said, can you confirm this? And he said, no, it's 3 3/8, not 3 3/4. So that was why I ripped back the gusset and re-knit it. It just seemed a little improbable to me. But if I lay this on here, these look like they are going to fit him really well. The glove is wider than the drawing because his hand has depth to it, but I'm pretty happy with it. I think if these don't fit him perfect, they'll fit him well enough that he'll get some use out of them. All I have to do now is knit the second sock and remember to make it opposite of this. So I always place the thumb about 1/2 inch in from the midpoint of the round, and then for the other one it'll be about 1/2 inch from the end of the round so that it will fit correctly. Like if you ever have a mitten and you just put the thumb out the side and you have a pattern on the back of the mitten, what you'll notice is you'll put it on and then this will rotate toward the side, so it won't be centered completely, it'll be pulled over. So if you put the thumb a little bit in on the hand, then you won't get that twisting. And for gloves, I think it's even more important so that things fit correctly. So that's my glove. I was going to explain how I divide everything out for the fingers and figure out how to cast on, but I think I need to think through it. I tried twice, recorded twice, and I thought I need to think through this to explain it. I know how I do it, but to explain it is a little different. So if you're interested in that, I can do that for the next time because I'll probably have these finished for the next Casual Friday. My other project is, surprise, surprise, a pair of socks. This time for me. I haven't knit any socks for myself in a while because I've been knitting them for my friends. And I wanted to use yarn that was sent to me by one of you. This yarn was sent to me last fall by a viewer named Craig. He sent me a few things, and one of them, well, he sent me 2 balls of this yarn. It's from, I'm going to probably butcher the pronunciation. Laine du Nord is the brand name, and it's called Infinity Sock. The colorway I'm working with is this one. Now, normally I will start from the center of a center pull ball. This yarn, the way that they're showing on the picture is that the sock, you know, has a solid color toe, and then you see a solid color for the leg, although you can see on mine, it's actually black that turns into dark blue. Then you do the heel, and then you go up the leg, and then you get these stripes. You start out with thin stripes, and then they get thicker. I never use all of the yarn, so I was just trying to decide which direction I wanted to knit, and I thought, I think I do want to knit toe up because I would like to have the toe be that color. I was looking at other pictures on Ravelry of people who would use this yarn, and some of them, you know, because it's going to depend on how big your foot is, how long it is, how big around it is, how much yarn you need for the foot. And there were quite a few people who ended up with a heel where they had some of the striping in the heel just because they ran out of the solid. And for me, it was like every last bit of solid I used and got the heel done. I probably had a couple of inches left when I started the leg, and so then I went right into that first stripe. So I could see from the way that the yarn was wound that this color was going to be on the outside, not on the inside. And so I have a few different kinds of these. I don't usually use them. This one is my favorite. I like this because the yarn can go underneath here, and I like that this one is Lykke, L-Y-K-K-E. It comes with different woods, and it's got this magnetic thing. So if I'm in a situation where I want to pull from the outside of the ball, I will use one of these. It's really rare. If I'm using a really sticky yarn where it's hard to get it to come out of the center, then I will do something like this as well. So I'm working from the outside. Now I could have started on the inside and done cuff down, starting with the wider stripes, but the problem is I don't know how, I don't know that I would end up with having that color at the toe. So by going toe up, I can see how far that colorway is going, and if I want to use all of it, then I know that at a certain point I'll need to start doing increases in the leg for some calf shaping, because I usually only use 75 grams of a 100-gram ball of sock yarn for a pair of socks for me, and that gives me a leg as long as I need it, or that I like it, and without needing to do any calf shaping. And so I do know that when I do want to use all the yarn up, I have to do calf shaping because I'm going to get another 3 or 4 inches of sock probably, just because I don't have very big feet and I've got those skinny ankles, so I don't need as much yarn usually. So that was my decision. Again, I'm using this, it's called a plain heel. It's just like an afterthought heel or forethought heel, only you do it when you come to it. And again, the reason I like this is because of how you set it up with a provisional cast on. Allows me to provisionally cast on more stitches than I had for half of the foot. So I had a 64 stitch sock, so 32 stitches for each side. So when I put 32 stitches on hold, I did a provisional cast on of 40 stitches, and that's what I need for my gauge and my heel depth, because I have a high instep. And then I have to do more decrease rounds, which increases the depth, but having more stitches also increases the circumference at the beginning of that heel, which I need. So that works out for me, but I can do that in any direction. So we can go to the overhead for a second and I can show you a little more up close what's going on with this. So this is the ball band. I cannot tell that this is shifting color on the foot the way it actually is in real life. And you can see in the sample that they were able to do their heel and then start the leg on the first stripe. So these are thinner stripes. They're spaced further apart and then they get closer together and the stripes get wider. So I think it's an interesting effect. So I do think I'd like to use the entire half of the ball and not cut it short. And so I'll probably need to do some increases along there. I did look on their website. They have a sock pattern for this infinity sock, and it's translated into English. There's no information that I can see about gauge or size. They just tell you what needle size to use, and then they're telling you how long to do things. And then they're having you use a smaller needle for the foot and then switch to a larger needle for the leg. I'm like, I need more information. I need gauge. And you can't just tell me how long to make a sock and think it's going to fit anybody. So that wasn't going to work for me. So I just decided to do a sock that I knew would fit me. I'm using a long round toe for my foot because that tends to fit me really well. There's a short round toe version as well if you have kind of wider toes that can fit people a little better. And this is my plain heel. Because I cast on extra stitches, these stitches were on hold while I was knitting the heel, so I needed to provisionally cast on stitches for here so I can knit in the round. And I cast on 40 stitches instead of the 32 that I had on hold. So I did my decreases only on this half of the heel until I was down to 32, and then I would do them on both halves all the way. But then when I picked up my stitches again later, I had more stitches than I needed for my leg. I wanted the same number for my foot as my leg. That works for my foot. So I had a little bit of a gusset right here. So just decreased on this half of the sock leg until I was down to 32 stitches. And then I could continue on. But if you have a larger ankle than you have ball of foot, you wouldn't have to do those decreases out. You could keep those stitches in. And I do that for my brother when I'm doing cup down and I had to do extra stitches for his plain heel. I don't decrease them out because his ankle is like 10 inches and his ball of foot is 11 1/8 or something. So he needs those extra stitches in his foot. So that's the beauty of a plain heel and being able to control the number of stitches that you have, both for the heel to change the depth, but also for if there's a mismatch between the ball of foot and the ankle, that you can control your stitch counts, which you can't do with a traditional after that heel. Those are made to be the same. So anyway, that's my sock in progress. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below. Or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.